Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
We got a set of lovely questions that the Energy Club sent in, and several of them are about career choices that Erroll has made over the course of his career. I thought it might be good to start by just asking you to sort of sketch in more detail how your education and career evolved and the extent to which there were or were not actual conscious choices along the way as your career evolved.
Before I do that, let me start, however, with a few opening caveats. First, of course, I'm extremely pleased to be invited and honored to be here. Second, you heard a lot of introductions. I like long introductions. They're like fine perfumes. They're sort of nice to sit back and savor them, but really fatal if you swallow them. Thirdly, it was mentioned we had prepared questions. I want you to know my preparation was on the way into the room here on these questions. And so with that, let me talk a little bit about my career. For those of you who are deep into career planning, as a lot of young people are these days, this will be a disappointment to you. I came here and started as a physicist. After the first year, I changed, as most new physics majors do, but for a different reason, because I was actually did quite well and was a Mellon Scholar at the end of the first year. But I didn't have much money, and it dawned on me that 4 years as a physics major would allow me to be a lab technician or to teach high school physics, neither of which I wanted to do. And so I changed to engineering, and I changed to electrical engineering because it had more physics in it. And so I finished with a degree in electrical engineering. Never really worked as an electrical engineer. Back in those days, you were allowed to go to graduate school immediately, and so I went to the University of Chicago, and because of my affinity for mathematics, started concentration in operations research. After a year of that, I decided, I'm learning a lot of cool things, which will probably be uncool in about 2 weeks after I graduate, and I don't feel as if I'm learning a body of knowledge. And so I switched to classical finance at that point, and I also opted to take my econ courses not in the business school, but in the economics school where all the Nobel laureates were. And so I finished Chicago with a very good degree in classical finance. So then I decided to take a job in IT at that point. And so, again, it was because of the work I had done early in my career at Carnegie. If I were here as a major today, I'd probably be a computer engineering major. And I was an IBM fellow in graduate school, but I didn't work for IBM. I went to work for Arco out in Los Angeles. Now, why do you pick your first company to work for after graduate school? The marketing people huddle in the corner and say, well, I think we should go to Procter & Gamble because they do it best. The finance people at that time would have gone to, and planners would have gone to General Electric. Well, I used the criteria. I had friends in L.A., and so I decided I was just going to go to L.A. And worked. And whatever plans I did have, and they were minimal at that point in time, were a little interrupted by this little thing called the Vietnam War, in which I had to participate for a number of years. And after that, I was living in Detroit because my last duty station was the Tank Automotive Command in Warren, Michigan. I got to drive tanks and cool trucks and things, boys and their toys, things like that. And I was ready to go back to Los Angeles, but I was married at the time, and my wife had tired of hearing stories about how much fun I had in Los Angeles as a bachelor. And she was halfway through her degree at the University of Michigan. She was getting a master's there, and so as a dutiful spouse, I stayed and I looked for a job. This was 1969. This is the last time I looked for a job.
So, Erroll, before you go on, tell them where you met your wife.
Oh, she's my 7th grade sweetheart. Yes. So I have known her for 58 years. Yeah.
So that's one 46. Thing the two of us have in common.
Yes. Yeah, we talk a lot because we're not allowed to at home. That's the reality. And so I took a job with Ford Motor Company for 4 years, and I was enjoying it. I was learning things. I didn't have to read Iacocca. I lived Iacocca there. And Headhunter came to me and said, how would you like to go to a job, more pay, more fun, better climate? They lied. To Xerox, a little company called Xerox. And I said, hey, I did, little if any due diligence on it. I went to Xerox, and the climate was better in Stamford, Connecticut, but they soon sent me to Rochester, New York, where it was horrible. And then after about 5 years total, I had another Headhunter calls and said, how would you like to go be chief financial officer at a then small Midwestern utility? And again, I did limited due diligence, but the chief financial officer sounded good, since even in my arrogance, I thought it was going to take a little while to be chief financial officer at Xerox at that time. So I went out there in an industry that I didn't really know, and really got lucky because it was one of the better companies in the industry. And the rest is pretty much history. And I only had one significant career decision to make, because I told my wife, we'll go to Madison, Wisconsin, and the airport was a Quonset hut at that time. But we'll stay here for 5 years. Finance is an entirely transferable skill, and then I will go to Chicago and we'll live in Chicago, and I'll be chief financial officer at a bigger company somewhere else. And my real crisis of career was when they kept promoting me, but they kept promoting me by adding things to my portfolio, and I was still a finance person. And then they came to me one day and said, we want you to run our field operations. And we want you to be an executive vice president. And this was really a little challenging, because that would make me a utility person as opposed to a finance person. And I would be less transferable. But my wife, again, said, I like it here. And so I became an executive vice president, and then president and CEO.
Well, so that actually leads nicely to the first question that we got from the Energy Club here. When Wisconsin Power and Light merged with two Iowa-based energy companies in 1998, you were picked as the first president of the newly formed Alliant Energy Corporation. Can you talk about the leadership challenges you faced while guiding the company through that period of transition?
This was really one of the more interesting events in my life, and I realize people use the term interesting to usually describe ugly babies when they're talking about it. But we had three companies that were three completely different cultures, and I mean really different cultures. And I forget who said that, culture eats strategy for breakfast or lunch, and it is true. We had a small company, Interstate Power, that had no females and no minorities in their management group. And the females on my team were adamant that we shouldn't merge. And so I had rebellion in the ranks because I was considering a merger with this company. The other company, Iowa Electric, was headed by a truly fascinating guy named Li Lu. He was a Chinese national whose parents were on the wrong side of the revolution, and who fled to Formosa and then to Brazil. But he was really a typical Chinese entrepreneur, which sort of essentially said, if we can make money at it, we will do it. And to hell with this core competency stuff. And so these were three very distinct cultures, and it was the first three-way merger in the utility industry since the Public Utility Holding Company Act had been passed in the early 30s, and 3 water companies tried it then. And so this was really new ground. And in the middle of it, there was a hostile hostile breakup attempt by another company, and the dueling ads in the Wall Street Journal, the coast-to-coast airplane rides, the breakfast in Dallas, the lunch in Los Angeles, the dinner in San Francisco. And the cool thing intellectually about this was that as the company, everything I said to those investors to make sure I didn't have a security violation, I had to post on Edgar that evening, which meant I knew the next day the opposition knew what I had said. And so therefore, I had to anticipate what they were going to say and then counter with new arguments. So it was really exhilarating, but it took 27 months of living like that, and that was a strain.
Well, another question that we got here is, can you give us an idea of how your company's electrical generation portfolio evolved during the course of your career with WPL and Alliant?
When you live in Wisconsin, you cannot help but be impacted by the proponents of green energy. And so I became sort of a convert over time. And at one point in time, we had the largest percentage of wind energy on our system than any utility in the United States. We were also the first utility to sell emission credits. I sold them to the TVA at a price that has never yet been achieved in emissions trading. Not that I took delight in screwing the government, but it was a good price. And so, again, we not only had wind, but I also thought about, we need to leverage that competency. And so we developed a business on siting wind farms and going through the permitting and engineering for other companies, much larger companies like Florida Power and Light, who also was getting into wind and didn't know as much as we had learned by then. And so that turned out to be a good business as well.
So, Erroll, you actually invited me out, if I remember correctly, to talk to your board about some of whom had doubts about whether climate change was real. This was a very long time ago.
Yes.
Talk about the process of how the industry as a whole, and your board in particular, has sort of come to terms with the broader, with that issue, but then also with the broader environmental issues the industry faces.
Utility boards generally have like sort of an average age of deceased, and they're very conservative in nature. And so when I started talking about building wind, and when I started talking about climate change, non-believers would be, a kind use of the term. But if you've ever experienced Granger's persuasive powers, he made it clear that the science is real. Even if you debate about what the source of the changes are, and people will still debate it, but there are only a few, and unfortunately they happen to be camped in the U.S. Senate, who don't believe that the changes are real. And the bad thing about the utility industry is you'd go into hearings, and I could put someone like Granger in a hearing to explain, and then the opposition would bring out the local high school physics teacher, then the administrative law judge would say things like, well, we've heard from 2 experts, and then you're dead. That doesn't happen at the federal level, but it happens at the state level. But that was a real highlight. But that was a highlight for you. But the highlight for me was that I had the arrogance to suggest to Granger that these slides were a little too complex, and he should probably change them. And I got the answer, and he was correct. He put the slides on as originally proposed, and it was much better than I have suggested.
I deny all memory. So you got gradually into concerns related to higher education, and there's a question here about your serving on the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin. You've more recently, of course, gotten heavily involved first in higher education, and now more recently in primary and secondary education. Talk a little bit about sort of how that interest has evolved over the years.
Well, as in most states, being on the State Board of Regents is held out to be the most prestigious gubernatorial appointment that the governor will make for the average citizen. And so the governor of Wisconsin asked me, and I didn't lobby, didn't have that much interest, and I actually said to him, I really don't want to sit up there with a bunch of political hacks that I really, you have to convince me that you're going to appoint people who will get things done for the university system. So he gave me all the assurances. I took the appointment, and his next appointment after me was just a pure political hack. And so I learned a lot being on the Board of Regents. It was a 7-year appointment. But really, it wasn't until I went to Georgia and ran the university system there that I truly learned.
Yeah, you were on our board also.
Yes, I was, and I actually had the pleasure of the honor of chairing the board for a number of years. But when you're on boards, you're looking in, and you never really know until you get inside. And then you find out that it's easier to change the course of history than it is to change a history course. And that, I didn't make the mistake that Eisenhower did and call all the professors employees. I didn't do that. But going from a corporate environment to a much more collegial, or I thought it was collegial, university environment was a cultural challenge for me, but I had a good time because the charge I was given was to make the university system of Georgia work more as a system. And that was a fun challenge because every president, whether it was Mike Adams, who was running a billion-dollar organization at the University of Georgia with 35,000 students, down to one of our 2-year colleges with 2,000 students, they were both equally assured that they knew exactly what to do and did not need much, if any, advice from someone like me, for example. But we persevered through that. Yeah.
And so how did you end up running a school district?
You got a sense of my complete lack of diligence when it comes to my career. I said, when I went to the university system, I said, no, I'm going to do this for 5 years. That's it. Because I went at age 61, and I said, I'll be maybe mature by the time I'm done. And so 5.5 years later, I stepped down, and the local school superintendent was leaving at the end of the semester, at the end of June. They had a search underway for a new one, and the mayor said, would you mind running this system for 3 months? So, how much due diligence you're going to do for 3 months? I kept telling myself that 3 years later. How much due diligence did you do? Because the third day on the job, let me go back just a little bit. I always tell people who are changing jobs, do not leave a job on Friday and start a new one on Monday. Take some time off. I did not violate that rule. I left the job on Thursday, started a new one on Friday. But it was Friday, like July 1st, and so then, like a good government bureaucrat, I had a 3-day vacation for July the 4th after my first day of work. But when I came back the next week, and I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, my third or fourth day on the job, the special prosecutor appointed by the governor handed me an 800-page report detailing the largest cheating scandal in U.S. education history. 40% of our schools had cheated. And I had this 800-page report, and I'm watching the search evaporate in front of my eyes for the new superintendent. Who wants to come here now? My board chair says, you have to analyze this report, and I want some recommendations for our next board meeting. Well, when is that? Monday. I said, okay. So by this time, I've got 4 days of K through 12 experience. I'm good. But, I got an 800-page report. And I'm a CEO. I don't read 800-page reports. And so I'm going to say things like, Granger, you do chapter 1, you do chapter 2, tell me what it is. And the special prosecutor says, no, can't do that. I said, what are you talking about? He said, members of your direct staff are implicated. So you cannot put this report in their hands. So I'm saying, so I have to read 800 pages based on my vast experience and give in public a full set of recommendations on Monday. And I will do an unpaid testimonial for a 5-hour energy drink. I will do that. It does, in fact, work, as many of you probably do know already. And actually, 20-hour energy drink does work as well. But I got it done, and then I had to replace almost instantly 200 people. And so I'm taking the moral high ground for the children. I'm snatching everybody out of their jobs. And by this time, let's see, it's probably mid-July. And one of my aides taps me on the shoulder and says, you know, this is all well and good, but we have to open school the second week in August. And you've removed 40 principals. You've removed almost 150 teachers. And, you know, we have to replace all of these people in the next 3 weeks. And so I was up a lot for the next 3 weeks. But to give you a sense of what you had to deal with, I had a board member call me in the middle of this, asking me, could I find the shoulder pads for the 8th grade middle school football team? And I said, these people are living in a parallel universe. You know, we have the largest cheating scandal in history. I'm scrambling. I'm working 18 hours a day to find people. And this board member wants me to find shoulder pads for an 8th grade football team. But, you know, I restrained myself. I didn't tell her where to put the shoulder pads.
So we want to open things up here for some questions, but maybe a couple of final things that it would be good to go back to the energy systems space. Talk a little bit about how you see the electricity industry evolving. And I mean, if we'd been holding this conversation 15 years ago, I don't think there would be more than 4 or 5 MBAs sitting here wanting to hear about energy systems. And so there's been quite a transformation in terms of interest in the field. But talk a little about how you see the field evolving and what sort of career opportunities you think probably exist for many of the folks sitting here in the room.
Well, I think it continues to evolve, sometimes more slowly than I would like. But I am pleased by the number of young people who are interested in it, because I've had a similar decision at the end of graduate school as I looked at employers. And I could have gone that time to Wall Street. It was a great place to go. I shouldn't knock Wall Street in the middle of the Tepper School, of course. But I said to myself, you know, when I pulled down the final curtain, I think I want to do more with my life than shave an eighth off a bond deal. Because you're coming into the world with nothing, you're leaving with nothing, and the only thing you can do while you're here is have impact. And energy is an area where you can have tremendous impact. And it's something that everyone needs. It's something that drives economies. It's the basis of our infrastructure. And there are just so many opportunities now, particularly with much more powerful computing capability, to do things differently, to leverage basic skills and knowledge into whether it's smart grids, whether it's smart meters. I've watched all these things evolve, and even in the nuclear industry, nuclear. Because of environmental pressures, nuclear will play a role as we go into the future, and they are dying for leadership in the nuclear industry. Not enough young people are going into nuclear because it was described as so bad for so long. But as you know, a cadre of seasoned leaders and managers is moving through the utility system. They are retiring. They are starting to retire, my generation, and they need to be replaced by people who understand that climate change is real, to understand that we need a portfolio of energy sources, and that they know how to truly quantify exogenous variables and externalities as they're making decisions, and that these are not weird things as they used to describe them when I started, that only the environmentalists did. These externalities are real, and people are starting to see those things now. So it's just a wonderful area, and you don't have to have one particular background to be successful, but I think you do have to have a sense that understanding that you are helping. You're helping your communities grow and prosper, and you're really helping improve the human condition as you do things in the energy area.
So why don't we open things up? Do we have folks who've got questions? We got microphones wandering around here. And we'll yes, there's one there and one there. So we'll take you first, since the mic is closer, and then we'll take you. Yeah. No, we're taking him first because he's already got a mic. But there's a mic right there for you.
All right. First of all, Mr. Davis, thank you very much for coming. I wanted to hear a little bit. It sounds like you had a very interesting transition from the corporate sector to the public sector. And what transferable skills do you think were most valuable to you during that transition?
That's a great question. People used to come up to me after I took over the university system, and they'd say things like, I am really glad a businessman is finally in charge of the university system. And I'd look at them and I'd say, why? Most businesses are mediocre. And then they sort of turn the other way. But Collins, in his book Good to Great, wrote a separate monologue or monograph about good to great in the social sectors, which I think he incorporated into a later edition of the book. But he made some very key points in there. Discipline, execution, and planning are not business concepts. They are leadership concepts. They are totally transferable. And I think once you understand those things, you can sort of poo-poo, business does this, public sector does that. Good leaders do the same thing in both places. And so it's a very short chapter, and I would encourage you to read it. Again, and I found it to be correct. Good leaders listen before they act. Faculty want you to listen a little more because they sometimes feel the decision is not a good one unless they had some input into it. But at some point you have to tell everybody, it's time to step off the curb, and we're going to do that. And so I would say I will collect input until this date. And so after that date, you can offer the input, but it's not going to inform the decision. And so and I didn't set the date tomorrow or anything like that. And so you have to understand the culture, but you can't let it subsume you. I mean, as long as you do some planning and you do discipline in a disciplined manner and execute in a disciplined manner, you'll be successful. Although I found in the K through 12 system, planning took on new meaning. Because all my career, I'd say, except for my career planning, I would say, we want to get to point B from point A, and here's what we have to do. Here are all the discrete steps that you have to do to get there. In the K through 12 system, I found that to get from point A to point B, I would put in 2 or 3 or 4 directionally correct programs and then manage the massive shocks to the system that were just ongoing. I'd never been in an environment like that where you just had so many perturbations to the system on an ongoing basis, but you learn how to deal with that too. It's like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face. Yeah.
Okay, over here.
Hi, I'm Rob. Thank you for coming. You talked some about, close to that, diversifying energy generation portfolios, and around the world we've seen efforts at that over the last 5-10 years, and public funding going into it, and then in a lot of cases pulling back after a few years. Do you see in the next decade or two, or just kind crystal ball look, is that ever, do you think, going to become more of a long-term permanent thing, or is it going to be attempts?
That's a great question, which is usually what you say when you're fumbling for an answer in your mind. But I don't think the question is really quite that easy, because there's the science and there's the politics. And my concern as I look at energy portfolios being assembled, or entire fleets of perfectly safe nuclear units being shut down for political purposes, and somehow, the science has to play more of a role in our energy policy, which is why when you talk about who's at the sweet spot of politics and science and engineering, it's engineering and public policy. And somehow we have to get more people educated in the science. People generally run away from science. And it may be wishful thinking, and we'll always have had, always will have politics, but we need to understand that we need to get to politicians early, because you changing your mind is a good thing, because you've synthesized more information, you've got a new view. Politicians, you're a flip-flopper if you change your mind, and it's a bad thing. And so we have let people get too institutionalized. Our senator from Oklahoma is not going to change his mind no matter what in public. But that, to me, will dictate how these energy portfolios go, how effective we are in promulgating the science and impacting the politics. If we can do that, then we'll get the right energy mixes in. And I can't predict what they're going to be, and they may it may be based in many ways on location as well, and what natural resources you have available to you.
So, Erroll, we've restructured not all of, but a significant part of the U.S. electricity system, with the result that what were once vertically integrated companies that could engage in reasonably systematic longer-term planning are now, independent power producers who are looking at quarterly returns and a intermediary entity that moves the power, and then distribution companies. Have you thought at all about, I realize you're no longer in this business, but have you thought at all about how we get back to more strategic resource planning in a space where we've sort of taken everything apart and there's not much in the way of incentives for people to engage in that, and yet we're doing stuff like, as you said, shutting down nuclear plants because gas is cheap and they're fully amortized, and yet in a few years, if we get serious about carbon control, we're going to need things like that.
Yeah. As always, you're correct. But unlike you, I'm not going to bash markets in the middle of the business school.
I didn't bash markets. I just said there is this problem. We haven't fully internalized the impacts of
but again, I see this as political versus economic issues. There just isn't any, and I don't think I'll ever agree that there can never be a coherent energy policy in this country. I can't go there. I just think I just have to keep pushing forward. But once we have that, then I can make the economics work. But, I can't plan for a future when the best thing might be a baseload nuclear unit from today's policy versus a combustion turbine on a rail car, which might be the policy next year. And so, that to me is the real issue, to get the politics right.
To get the incentive structure.
Right.
We got, yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Courtney Williamson.
You don't have to stand up. It's okay.
No problem. I am a PhD candidate in organizational behavior, and my dissertation actually focuses on community college student performance. And so I'm actually wondering, do you sort of encourage a collaboration with researchers who are interested in gathering field data to look at some of the pertinent issues that affect education, such as different programming that might affect student GPAs, student retention, and graduation?
Well, while I was superintendent, of course, we had a lot of people studying us and a lot of people helping us. And what I found was that there's very little that's being promulgated that actually hurts kids. There are just tons of ideas on how things can be made better. And it turns out just about everything works. So it's not really the question of what works. The question is what works most effectively. And a fellow named John Hattie did some research on that. And you'd be surprised and he did it over a 10-year period, watching new programs being introduced, watching a focus here, a focus there. Everybody, and he had a scale from 1 to 1.2 of what things work, or 1.2 was the best. And the most impactful thing that you can do for a child is to get that child, that individual child, personally interested in his or her education. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And what he did is he also drew a cutoff, like 0.6, I think it was, that everything below that still worked, but it was noise. Small classrooms are 0.4 in that. Small classrooms are not the answer. But people love small classrooms. It's intuitive. They think, and they read a book or went to a seminar or something like that. And so, I would always open the system up, participate in research because, but I was always looking at, is your idea scalable? Is it cost effective? Because if it's not scalable, talk to the principal, don't talk to me. Pick a school, talk to a principal on that. And it's because they do work. The ideas generally do work, but I have to have things that are cost effective and scalable across a large system to really be impactful. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Adrian West. I'm a first-year Tepper student. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you moved up very quickly throughout the different organizations that you work with. Mm-hmm. And so as an aspiring leader, do you have any, little words of wisdom or things we can take with us that we can use over the next, 3 or 4 years early in our careers, to get us, up to the C-suite, essentially?
Yeah, I want to say something like buy low, sell dear. That's the best advice, of course. What I found was that I didn't worry about this stuff. If I was given something to do, my goal was to do it well, to not make excuses, to be accountable for your work and do it well. And, this is sort of simple stuff. But the one thing I did focus on was feedback. Because when I completed a project, I would say, how did I do? And they always say, oh, you did great. You did fine. I said, well, good. Does that mean I'm ready for your job now? Then you got a different answer. No, not quite. I said, okay, then tell me what I need to do to get your job. Now, you don't want to ask that question the first week on the job. This is not a good idea. But, learn your job, add value, learn how to shape your job. Yeah, one of the things young people have sometimes difficulty coming to grips with is when you do good work here, you get an A. When you go out in the industry, they expect you to do good work. And so we're just looking for A work. And so if you want to excel, you have to do something different than A work. You have to learn your job, and then you have to reshape that job and show that you're adding value to the enterprise. Now, you can put nice terms around it, like increasing your marginal revenue products and things like that. But, I didn't use those terms. But, learn what you're doing, do it well, and then do something different. Reshape the job and show that you are valuable. The other thing to remember is that your boss is not going to promote you. Your boss can keep you from getting promoted, but it is other people with whom you're going to work in other areas and other departments that are going to observe you, that will want you for their team, that will move you up. But I also, the last caveat, of course, is advice is worth what you pay for it. And so
let me add to that. I mean, every year at graduation in our department for many years, I've had to stand up and give the talk to the graduating students. And one of the bits of advice that I have always given is to stop every so often and ask, am I really having fun in this job? And unfortunately, a lot of people are sort of locked into jobs and careers and don't have the possibility of changing. But, you folks are all Carnegie Mellon graduates. You do have that opportunity. And so it's really important, I think. You got to invest, and not every job is full of stuff that maybe you would just as soon not have to do. But you want to pause periodically and say, is this really what I want to be doing? Am I enjoying myself? And if the answer is no, then you ought to start looking around and find something else.
That's great advice. That's the advice I gave my kids. Follow your passions. If society values what you do, you'll make more money than if society doesn't value. But you're only going to get one time around in life. I remember studying electrical engineering here. I felt it was like the place where fun came to die. And it was just too hard, and so, have fun. Now, I always, I say that to the team, are we having fun yet?
We're going to 20 after? Yeah. So we have time for maybe one more question, if we've got one.
And I could give my first short answer.
Yeah. But seeing none. Yeah. Okay. Last question. It's coming. It's right behind you.
Right here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Colleen McMullen here at the Tepper School. I'm the Executive Director of Diversity. And one of the things I always like to get a sense of is, what is the best advice that someone has ever given you that you either share or have incorporated into your career?
Jeez, that's a hard one. I think the best advice I ever got, I think, was just do well. No excuses, just do well. And if you do well, life will work out. It really will. And I just, as you can see from one of my earlier monologues, I didn't plan a lot of things. I was lucky. Everybody's going to be lucky or unlucky. But you have to have the confidence in yourself. As Granger said, if you don't like it here, if you don't like what you're doing, just go somewhere else. Find a place where you're appreciated. Find a place where you can have more fun while you're working. I was raised by a generation of people who didn't worry about fun or think about fun. It was just, can I get a job? Can I hold on to a job? And first generation college students are usually given that advice: get a job, hold on to the job. Because I was changing from Ford to Xerox, and my father went ballistic. He wanted to know, why are you changing? And I was trying to explain to him, and he said, what's a Xerox? And I was trying to explain that. And then I finally said, Dad, I really don't enjoy it at Ford. So what? He said. And I could see we had some different views on life, but that was his life. He had to work real hard, work through a depression, and a job was something to be coveted. But you guys, you're bright. You have so many options available to you. Pick one you like, and then if it doesn't work out, and remember, when you go to your first job, and most of you are already on your first jobs, you're going to change anyway. And so that's why I didn't worry too much about my first job. I knew the data said I'm not going to be there anyway.
Okay, with that, I will say thanks so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
No,
thank you.